Good evening. Tonight, I'd like to talk to you about selecting the best concept to develop for the rest of the International Design Project. You've so far come up with a wide variety of ideas, and within your team, you need to pick one of these ideas to be developed and built, hopefully in 2 different iterations during the rest of the project. And this is something that you need to approach quite carefully, because from this point on, it starts to cost you a lot of time if you go back and change your mind. And concept selection is a bit further on in the design process from the idea generation. And I said in the last video that at the start you wanted lots of creativity, and towards the end of the design and prototyping process you want lots of structure. And at this stage, you need a bit more structure to make sure that you get a good result in your concept selection, but not too much. A lot of engineers will say to you that the way to select a concept is to assign scores. So you decide what the criteria are for assessing your product, and then you create a table with a column for each one of your concepts, and then a row for each of the criteria, and then you just assign scores, and at the bottom you add up the scores, and the concept with the highest score wins. Now, there's nothing wrong with that as one possible approach, but I'd caution you against using that as the single approach for choosing a concept. It's quite a good approach if you are talking about revisions to some existing concept, or if you are talking about something which is entirely non-emotional. So if you, for example, wanted to come up with a method and some hardware, some software for streaming video in Africa, then it could be very useful with something complex like that, something that's not too emotional, to put together a scoring table and figure out how the concepts score relative to each other. The problem with the scoring method is that it tends to lend a false sense of objectivity to things which you can't really quantify. Things like the appearance of a product, how good it looks, or the pleasure and satisfaction that are derived from using the product. And if you try to do scoring tables for things like smartphones or sports cars or things like that, you'll often find that something like an iPhone or a Lamborghini will score very badly because it's so expensive. And it nevertheless sells in very large numbers and is a great success because it brings the owner of the product enough happiness, enough pleasure. And that's really something that you can't quantify in a table. And that's why, from my point of view, it's essential that you use more than one method to compare concepts. You'll probably find when you start out with your scoring tables that they tend to favor something that's fairly conventional, so not so way out, not a crazy idea, and something which is fairly balanced but at the same time fairly grey, something that you might find isn't interesting. And that's why I suggest that you use 2 other approaches to assess your concepts, and you can actually use as many different approaches for comparing your concepts as you wish, but I've put together a sheet about concept selection which I'll upload to StudIP, and the first of the methods listed on here is the scoring table. The others are to use your instinct, so your gut reaction. So which one do you think is the best product? And you might not know why. If you don't know why, it's important that you think about this very carefully and think, well, why do I think this one is the best concept for further development? Especially if this then contradicts the results that you get from the other methods. And this is something that you can do probably to start with individually. That's probably the best case, because if you do it individually, if you write down your gut reaction and what your instinct is about each of the concepts, just in 1 or 2 sentences, then that avoids you influencing each other. And if you influence each other, you get this averaging effect, and you sort of tend towards the middle. Like I was saying with the scoring table tending to favor the sort of grey concepts, the balanced concepts, but maybe not the most exciting ones. And the same thing happens when you average people's opinions. So I'd suggest with the instinct, with the gut reaction, that in the first instance you do that individually. If you want to look at it from a statistical point of view, you can look not only at the average but also at the standard deviation if you want to assign some kind of a score to that instinctive feeling. Although, like I say, be careful that you don't underrate the emotional aspects here, and that you don't try to over-quantify them, because emotions are things that can be incredibly strong. They can often be stronger than the logic behind something, stronger than the opinion that someone has of the product's manufacturer, of their reputation. It can often be the strongest aspect in deciding to buy a product or invest in a product. Just this emotional feeling, well, do I want it? Is it the right thing? And the last approach that I suggest that you use is to get some feedback. And when I say that, I mean go to people who are also in your degree courses, but maybe not taking the International Design Project. Ask them what they think to your different concepts. Ask them what their favorite is, what problems they might see, what they'd actually buy. But then not just within your degree courses. Go and ask people who are studying other subjects. Ask people who are studying languages or history or geography. Ask people, if you can, who are perhaps living or have lived in developing countries. See what their opinions are. Because it's very easy for you to get a pet idea and then trick yourself into believing that it's awesome. Now, at this point, I'll show you a famous quote from Richard Feynman, the famous physicist. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. It's easy for you to do this gradually. You have a favorite idea, and so when you do your scoring table, you then rate down the other ideas. You give them bad scores so that you get the result you want. Now that is a complete anathema to what the scoring table is supposed to be, but it happens very often. The same thing happens with job interviews sometimes. If you have a scoring table and you're trying to weigh up, well, which candidate's best, then people will actually start with this opinion that, candidate A is best. And so they'll rate down the other candidates so that their favored candidate then wins. And this is a way of fooling yourself. So be very careful that you don't have a pet idea in your mind that perhaps has a critical weakness, and then you pick that idea, you pursue that idea, although you know in the back of your mind that you're fooling yourself. It's also important to think about how critical it is that you have a sort of balanced all-round product that maybe has versatile applications, that's maybe, it meets a lot of different criteria in a very balanced way, and maybe instead you have a situation where one of the criteria is far more important than the other. I mean, if you look at something like, say, a moon rocket, if the moon rocket doesn't get to the moon, well, basically it's useless, and it just created you a bigger problem and then you had to start with. It's just created you problems without giving you any benefit. Maybe you've got some astronauts stuck in space, and maybe you've got an expensive program that the media views as being a waste of money. There are others too. There are things like, if you're talking about, say, armor plate. Armor plate is something where really you want it to work perfectly. You want it to stop the bullets or the shells, and it's not much good if half of the shell gets through the armor plate because it's still going to kill you. Or if you want the fastest car on the earth for the land speed record, it needs to be the fastest car, and being 5 miles an hour below the record isn't much good. And think about really what it is that you're looking for in terms of your criteria, your objectives and things, and obviously build those into your scoring system when you make a scoring table, but also bear them in mind when it comes to your own instinct. Sometimes you find that your instinct, your gut reaction changes the more you learn. And that's a sign that you're probably not conning yourself. That's a good sign. And then once you've been through these different approaches to concept selection, and you've got the results of the scoring table, you've got the results of people's instinct, and you've also got some feedback from other people, compare them and see if they match. If they all match and indicate that you should develop one of your concepts further, then great. Then I think you can take that as being a good result, a clear result, and you can move on. But that rarely happens. You usually find that the different methods favor different concepts, different ideas, and you'll find that then you need to have a discussion and weigh things up. You might even find sometimes that perhaps your scoring table and your feedback favor one particular concept, but your instinct does not agree with those results. And you need to think very carefully about that. Is your instinct based on some reason that you perhaps haven't acknowledged, something you haven't really been able to articulate? And think very hard about that and think about what the origin of your gut reaction is. I mean, maybe it's just that you have a gut reaction that you can't really pinpoint and say, well, it comes from anywhere. Maybe it's like a tortoise that can sense hours or days in advance that rain is coming and move to higher ground. And then the question is, well, if you can't actually pinpoint it and say, this is the reason for my gut reaction, then how much do you trust your own gut reaction? Maybe you're good at this kind of thing. Maybe you can trust your gut reaction. Or maybe actually you think that the feedback from other people is more reliable. Maybe you should go that route instead. So what I want you to do is to go through these three methods as a minimum. You don't necessarily have to do it for all of the 10 concepts that you've presented in your last document as a team. You can narrow it down a little bit by whatever method you choose, and then maybe apply these three methods to the top 5 ideas, something like that, or even the top 3 ideas if you think you have only 3 good contenders, and then go through the process. Add some extra methods if you want, extra ways of comparing the methods if you have your own ideas, or you can find something in the literature. And then what I want you to do is pick one concept, make a firm choice that you're going to develop for the rest of the project, and do a good drawing of it, just a single drawing, but a good annotated drawing. And then I want you to write about half a page of A4 paper explaining how the concept works, what its essential features are, and about half a page of A4 paper explaining why you've chosen this concept and what the results of the different approaches are. That's a minimum. If you want to attach things to that document, things like your scoring table, or a summary of your own instincts, your gut reactions, or maybe some quotes from other people you've asked about these concepts, then please feel free to do that. I'd also encourage you to do that. What I will do at this stage, I'll give you a little bit of feedback about 3 of my favorite ideas as the project supervisor. And I'll warn you in advance that anyone who gives you feedback, well, everyone is biased. People have their own individual biases, and what I'm going to say to you now is obviously influenced by my own biases. And to give you some reasons why I'm biased, I come from England. I have that as a national identity background that may cause me to favor certain ideas. My experience of developing countries is largely based on English-speaking developing countries because I don't speak Spanish or Portuguese or something like that. So I don't see what goes on in those countries. And I'm also a mechanical engineer. So I tend to favor things which I understand well as a mechanical engineer, probably more inclined to favor the mechanical solutions. And I also like simple things, old school things that are built with few components and last a long time, that kind of thing. I'm a bit of a low-tech person. So bear this in mind when I give you some feedback. I've picked 3 concepts which are some of my favorites. I also like some of the others, but these are 3 good examples. From team number 1, the paper from the elephant dung. I really like this idea because I see it as being something very creative, very novel. And I think in developing countries where they have elephants, if you could make paper from the elephant dung, this would be something that you could use for souvenirs that could be sold and could then earn the people money. However, I think you need to put a bit of thought into what you're going to do with the paper. Is it intended as writing paper or for making maybe paper mache sculptures, souvenirs, things like that? If it's writing paper, you'll probably find that you need to roll it or press it to get it into a sufficiently thin sheet and possibly bleach it. And it would be really interesting if this was a concept that also worked with, say, horse dung, because unless you have good connections at the zoo, I'm not sure you'll be able to get the elephant dung to test the concept. So I think you need to make something that works with several different kinds of dung. Team number 2, the recycled air conditioner. I like this thing because it's a great equalizer, if you like. In developing countries, rich people often have air conditioning, poor people never do. And nevertheless, you'll see that the number of cars that are ending up in junkyards in developing countries with air conditioning as part of the vehicle is increasing. Those cars from the 90s and early 2000s that have air conditioning are starting to show up in junkyards there. And while a refrigerator, a household refrigerator that ends up in a junkyard is probably broken, it's quite likely that the air conditioning system in the vehicle is still functional. And it would then therefore be a very interesting thing to see if you can make, say, an air conditioning system for a simple house using the parts of a car's air conditioning system. I think one point you need to look at, though, is what you can do with the refrigerant to make sure that it's safe, because some refrigerants are dangerous for the environment, some are dangerous for people, maybe a bit less so. But can you use a safe refrigerant, and will you be able to get it in the developing country? And the last one I'll mention, the solar balloon. This one is just plain fun. I really like this idea because people will look at it and think, cool, that's awesome. I think your biggest challenge here is probably finding a suitable gas, because helium will almost certainly not be available. You may find that you can generate hydrogen through some chemical reaction. Obviously, it has some dangers associated with it. Or you may find that you can use something like methane or ammonia, which is only slightly lighter than air if your balloon's big enough. But I really like this idea because it has this X factor, if you like. When I say X factor, I mean something where you just look at it and you think, wow. Something that you really can't put a number on, but you see it and you love it. So, that's your assignment for this coming week. I'd like the assignment finished by the 22nd of June. So if you can put that together into a single PDF with a good quality annotated sketch of your chosen concept, and then half a page explaining how the concept works, half a page explaining why it's been chosen, and then maybe a little bit as an appendix, the results of your scoring table, then a bit about how your instincts have weighed up, and at the end maybe some feedback quotes from other people. That's all for today. If you've got any questions, please let me know. Thank you.